Morning, everyone, and thanks very much for joining us today. The first webinar for the Fraud Advisory Panel's Future Counter Fraud Community. This is a really big kind of event for us because it's the launch of a programme that sort of sits at the centre of the Fraud Advisory Panel's activity. We looked at setting up Future Counter Fraud Community around the middle of last year, and the reason we have done this is we, as an independent charity, have so much wonderful support and expertise through our corporate membership, through our supporters, that we wanted to kind of use that expertise to help guide people who are looking to move into the counter fraud space, and really to make the most of what you all already know and how we can help those who want to move into it or who maybe have just joined and they want to kind of further their career. So the line, obviously, as you'll know, for it is generational change through education and collaboration, and the collaboration side is really kind of shown today by this webinar. We set up this session really for, as I mentioned, anyone who's looking to move into counter fraud, also to enhance their knowledge, their expertise, and it's also been designed so it can be useful for people who have, maybe new to management, bringing on new joiners, setting up new teams. So we'll get an insight today from several experts, so you can look at, when you're bringing new people onto your team, what may they be thinking, what will they want to know. We've got 4 panelists today, so I will go through and kind of introduce them, and then we'll go into a series of questions right at the end. So sorry, there'll be questions that I will ask, the panelists will discuss it, and then we'll open it up to questions through the Q&A box. They'll be done through a moderator. But for our panel today, I'll ask them to introduce themselves, give them a brief summary of their career so far, and then we'll get straight into the content of the session. So Michael, can I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, so yeah, my name's Michael Cassell. I look after Brent Council's investigation function, which takes on various guises, so both internal and external sort of fraud matters. I've been involved in fraud, counter fraud, for probably close to 20 years across the public sector, but predominantly in Brent. So that's me.
Michael. Zoe.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zoe Nankar. I work in Cancer Research UK. I'm a counter fraud specialist. I'm probably the newest into fraud, as I've only been working in fraud for about 2 years and 4 months. I initially got into fraud in Enfield Council doing an apprenticeship, and I passed that apprenticeship in September and got the job at Cancer Research UK in October. So it's very quick turnaround. So yeah, previously to that, I worked in banking at Barclays and Metro Bank. At Barclays, I was a cashier, and at Metro Bank, I was a customer service representative, so the person that opens and closes accounts and stuff like that. So I did work a little bit with fraud, but I wasn't directly investigating cases at that time, so fairly new.
Thanks, Zoe. Kevin?
Hello, my name is Kevin Holland. I head up the Southwest London Fraud Partnership. So I look after 5 local authorities in Southwest London. My background, my whole career has been within local government in internal audit and fraud. I was involved in setting up the counter fraud investigator apprenticeship. And I currently have 3 apprentices who are now nearing the completion of their 2-year apprenticeship. And the reason for this, so fraudsters, they're not sector biased. They will go wherever they can to get the benefits themselves, which is why we all need to be able to work actively together.
Thanks, Kevin. Sandra.
Hi, my name is Sandra Sadi. I'm a senior manager in the Global Investigative Unit at Pinkerton. Pinkerton is a risk management and corporate investigative firm, and I basically been in the sort of anti-fraud, financial crime prevention field for over 8 years now, specializing in mainly financial crime prevention. And I have been certified fraud examiner in 2019 as well. My main experience lay in yes, financial crime prevention from investigative firm.
Thanks, Sandra. So as I mentioned, the way this will now run is there'll be sort of 3 or 4 areas that we're going to all discuss. The session is being recorded because it's going to be hosted on our website for people to use further down the line. And if you have got questions, please can just put them in the Q&A. They'll be moderated, and then when we get time, we'll ask them at the end. But I think if we just go straight into the content of today, I think bearing in mind who we have delivering this for, people who are joining us today and people who will be watching it further down the line. I think it'd be good to get an idea of what are the sort of 2 or 3 things that you would like to have known right at the start of your career, because we've been working in this space for quite a while. So if we can take ourselves sort of right the way back, what are the 2 or 3 things that you'd like to really have known? I think Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So yeah, I'll kick off. So it's a bit difficult. It's been a long time, but I brought through, like Kevin, a couple of apprentices over the last year. I've experienced the challenge, and I brought in new staff over the last several years. So I think if it was me, and I'm coming into the counter fraud world, I would want to have a good understanding that there's a large network of counter fraud professionals, whether that's in the police, public sector, private sector, voluntary sector, like Zoe, you know, and they're all got similar objectives. They all want to prevent or detect fraud, but they'll have similar objectives and aims. So it's a really useful thing to know, because that means the training, the conferences, the events, everything like that is going to have the same themes. Yeah. And so it's really important to understand that. And it's important to understand that from day one, really, you want to be getting involved in sort of working groups and sort of learning and development. So your initial training that you might have had, or transferable skills when you come into counter fraud for the first time, you really can't rest on your laurels. You need to be developing. I haven't come across any counter fraud professional in any sector that is an absolute expert in everything. There's always something to learn. There's ongoing changes with legislation, etc. So really important to start in the good mindset, hit the ground running, and then just go from there. The next sort of really important thing is networking in general. So, you know, you have your building up your networks as a counter fraud professional is really important, whether it's with organizations, colleagues from around different sectors, really, really important. You'll find that every case that you might look at, you develop another contact or another organization that you haven't dealt with. And so you will naturally develop those contacts anyway. But having an understanding and a good starting place is things like LinkedIn, you know, developing your own profile so others can see you, so you're visible in the counter fraud world, is a good starting point probably in this day and age. Yeah. And then looking out for counter fraud related conferences and events, wherever you're, you know, happen to be in, whichever sector you happen to be based in. So whether that's voluntary, private, public sector, look out for those conferences and start from there. And then I'll probably finish off on I'd sort of term it as resources, really, just understanding your remit. So the job that you have, understanding what it is and how you develop your knowledge and understanding for the rules, the regulation, best practice. That is really important. It's good to have a general understanding of counter fraud, but you need to be an expert, and you need to learn how to be an expert quickly, and really develop your skills. Yeah. And so keeping in touch with legislation and guidance and best practice is really, really important. And probably I'd just end on, you know, ask questions. So whether that's your managers, your mentors, colleagues, it's just really important to ask questions, keep asking questions, and you'll develop. That's me, Matt.
Thanks, Michael. I think that point around, not resting on your laurels and constantly looking to learn more is really important, isn't it? I think that feeds into what Kevin said as well, that fraudsters are pretty much cross sector. They don't just sort of operate in one specific area. They will diversify. They'll look at different things and different tactics and techniques. So I think staying on top of the developments that we've got is a really important part of that.
Yeah. I mean, prevention now is almost as important, or if not more important, than detection. Whereas in the old days, it's very much a reactive sort of, playing catch up all the time. So prevention is now very much at the center. Understanding the risks and how to prevent them. It's very important.
Yeah, and I think having the resources that we've got now, we are able to collaborate much more. And to share learning and kind of not necessarily be as reactive as maybe we were 15, 20 years ago, maybe. Sandra, sorry, Kevin.
So I've got to add to that when I said about the fraudster, they're not biased on any particular sector. They're usually not loyal to their product. So that's why with the continuous need to make sure you are refreshing and on your game. If we close down one avenue for a fraudster, the serious career-minded fraudsters, and they are career-minded, they will look to find somewhere else that they can exploit the systems or some loopholes. So that's why, yes, we need to be doing more on prevention, but also for spotting what the next possible fraud attack fraud risk might be. And to do that, the fraudster, they are continually upskilling themselves, and we need to follow suit.
Absolutely. I was going to say, from your profession, Sandra, obviously, the global side, the global network that you've got and have developed over time. If we can go back to kind of when you started in your career, following on from what Michael and Kevin have said, is there anything else that you would sort of say to yourself, or would you really emphasize the importance of having that network and continually upskilling yourself, really?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was going to say, and Michael already sort of touched upon that, one of the way to expand the network and get information in the field would be to obviously having access to that LinkedIn, which is like a good one-stop shop, for information, because all organization or regulation authority, company, subject matter expert, use that network site. So knowing how to use it and use it is also is definitely like a good source of information. I would say not just having a profile, but also do not hesitate to connect with subject matter experts. They are usually very approachable. If you ask connection or just follow them on the LinkedIn page, they will be more willing to accept you. Even if you have any question, ask, don't hesitate to add them. Most of the time, and I've done that myself, they come back to you quite easily. So that's kind of interesting to do that. They also update a lot what they're doing, the conferences, the webinar, the organization that you need to be aware of. So it's a good way also to keep up to date what's going on in the field. I would also say, because resources can be kind of overwhelming, like not just focus on anti-fraud, but like understanding a bit better what is financial crime as a whole, because fraud is part of a bigger issue, which is financial crime, and understand how it fits in this field as well is important to do. I would also recommend, in terms of resources and also in a way to expand your network, is read book about the field. There are a lot of books out there. Most of the time you'll see that some kind of prominent and subject matter expert write forward in those books, or you know about those writer knowledgeable about the field as well. So it's a good way also to keep up to date with the new trend, new regulation, new legislation, and just understanding a bit better the topic. There are also a number of nonprofit organizations that rely upon network of students or young professionals, and it's a good way as well to be part of those. They provide newsletter, they allow you as well to be a member. So that's something as well to look into. And I would say there are other organizations such as the Charity Food Awareness Week that is also a good source of information. And the FCAC also has launched their mentorship scheme, which is a good thing to look into as well in terms of resources and expanding the network. So yeah.
With the network, you mentioned obviously mentor. Mentor is a really important part of the FCFC. So I think we were able to get people like yourselves and to speak to mentors. Obviously, that's a plug for the mentoring scheme that we'll certainly take forward. Zoe, from when you started, you mentioned obviously you've been involved for in this space for a couple of years. How would you feel sort of going back to when you started, when you moved out of the banking kind of industry? You've got a real fresh kind of perspective on the importance of network that Kevin, Sandra, and Michael have said. So it'd be great to hear your views on that and how you've seen or what the benefits you see of having that network.
Yes, so my whole career in fraud has been built on networking. So I personally started building my network when I was working in Metro Bank, and this is when I kind of sparked my interest in fraud and definitely knew that this is something that I wanted to pursue. I didn't really know where to turn, and I obviously didn't have that much experience. So I reached out to so many people that worked at Metro Bank in the fraud industry and connected with random people on LinkedIn. And I really just had to put myself out there and just message them and not think about the fears of what type of response that I'd get. So many people came back to me and told me about their journey and what qualifications that they needed to get into the fraud industry. It was only then that I realized why all my applications previously that I'd submitted to fraud support roles were unsuccessful, and that I needed some specific qualifications. So that really channeled my mind to where I needed to go. And through that, I met somebody at Metro Bank who was a fraud manager there, who really helped me with an interview that I had for Enfield Council, which enabled me to get the job for the apprenticeship that I did, which helped me get into this job. And even when I finished my apprenticeship at Enfield Council, I was kind of at a position where I didn't know whether I was going to be taken on, and I didn't know whether I was going to have a job at the end of it. And through applications on LinkedIn, I decided to take it up a level, and actually, after applying for the job, would try and reach out to somebody on LinkedIn there so that they could get familiar with my name. And doing that, I ended up getting the job at Cancer Research UK. So really putting myself out there, really making connections with people, building professional friendships with people, helped me massively. And I don't think that I would be able to be where I am if it wasn't for that. Also, now that I work in a charity, I am part of the Charities Against Fraud platform, where other charities can come together and just build connections there. You never know who you might need in the future, who will be very pivotal in the case that you're working on. So being involved in those platforms are really, really helpful, even though I haven't used it to a great degree right now that has helped in a specific case for me right now. I know that it's there, and if I need somebody to speak to from, let's say, like the NHS fraud, I was thinking about reaching out to somebody from the NHS, from the fraud industry, and getting an idea of how their policy works so we could model something similar for us. So it's great to build connections in that sense.
And how, when you were sort of starting off, and you mentioned obviously looking at people on LinkedIn, how did you find the right people to speak to?
Well, I thought about where I'd like to work. first, like what company, what organization that I'd like to work, and then just went through finding people who worked in the fraud industry there and just made connections. I was just connecting with anyone basically who would accept, and the people that did accept were really helpful and forthcoming with information. I remember, well, I did connect to somebody from Metro Bank who told me that they had applied for their position that they were working in 4 times and didn't get the position, and said that at the last interview that they did get, they had written so many notes on their interview, and they actually offered to send me these notes to just try and help me. And I had never met this person. This is the first time I've spoken to this person. So you just don't know what type of reception that you're going to get until you make that effort. So yeah, just spread your wings and just try and connect with people. And you don't have to really know exactly what to say, but people love that you're making that effort, and they love to help you to get to where they are today, because they know how hard it was for them to get there. So yeah.
It's all been pretty positive. With that hard work, you do actually get there.
Yeah, for sure.
I just want to sort of go back very quickly to the point that was raised around sort of legislation, and the point Sandra you made as well around the resources that are out there. It can seem quite overwhelming, and I think I know that, obviously we all know that, and as Michael said, we've got the private, the public sector. It's a huge space to be operating in, and when we know that our work is against people who are constantly changing and evolving, it's really important to be focused on the right things. So where would you say people should look at to really kind of know what to read, Sandra? Would you say it's more around starting with the legislation, the guidance? Obviously, I'll ask Michael and Kevin this as well, so it'd be good to hear your views. But would you say getting familiar with the legislation, that regulation, is a really important part of the start of your career?
Maybe not the regulation because it can be very overwhelming and difficult to understand. I would say start with the industry you're in. So, for example, if you work for a bank, for example, it's important to know that the legislation that basically under which your industry fall under. Most of the time, though, you don't have to do that yourself. If your company is well organized, you will have training about that. You will have your manager helping you to understand a bit better how it works. So you will normally have a good network to guide you in terms of what you need to know. But I still think it's important to be curious and try to dig a bit further about like those changes. Most of the time, they're not going to have an impact on your day-to-day work when you start your career, but it's important to know what they are for. So one of the good way I would say to mitigate that sense of overwhelm coming from all those information is just maybe again find organization nonprofit that release newsletters specific to your industry. They will simplify and sort of like narrow down a bit the information you need to know. That they will go through like the complexity of the regulation legislation for you, and they will translate it in a way that it's easier for the reader to read. So that's one thing. And again, like I would say, rely upon like your manager and the training that you will get from your organization that will help you also understanding the framework in which you're operating in. So those would be my main sort of point on that.
Yeah, and to add to that, so I mean, many organisations, their response to fraud can be different. Some of it's treated internally, so a civil-based approach. Others, it very much comes on the criminal side, and where all of my for local government, I'm sure Michael will say the same. There's the CPIA requirements. All our investigations have to start at that level. You can't build back up to a criminal standard. You have to start at that high standard. And on criminal cases, and yes, as a start, you wouldn't be expected to know it all, but the better you know the relevant legislation and offences for your sector area, the better you are able to focus and direct your own investigation. The offences give you the points to prove, and you need to understand that, so you know, to help you steer in which direction you go to progress and hopefully conclude your investigation. And to help that in all sectors. I'm in local government, so we have our own across London, the London Borough Fraud Investigators Group. We have a couple of conferences we have twice a year. I'm in public sector, so there's a government conference, but there are many fraud conferences across all the different sectors. And that's where you'll hear hopefully both key pieces of legislation that might be of relevance to assist you with progressing your investigation, but also this whole bit about it's a one big shared fraud community, or fraud investigation community, because we learn by experiences, but sometimes the benefit through shared experiences. And some of the best sessions at any of these conferences are where you get real investigators giving feedback on case studies.
If I can add to that, Matt, just sort of one last thing regarding how to approach this new update on legislation regulation. I would say also going back to the subject matter expert as well. Like if you follow them on social media, they are likely, especially if they are in the anti-fraud field, they are likely to talk about it, and they are likely to sort of, again, simplify those information for you. So following those experts in the field will help you as well, being aware of what's going on, and they will be likely to, again, simplify that information and bring it to you in a way that it's easier to digest.
I think that point as well around conferences is one that really needs to be highlighted, because even I get surprised with how many conferences and free events there are actually out there. So the ones that you've mentioned, Kevin, and I think really flagging the fact that there are lots of resources and lots of events that are out there for people to attend. And I'll come back to conferences in a minute, but I suppose going right the way back to the start, Michael, it goes to the point of understanding your remit, and you know, as Kevin said, go in at a really high standard under CPIA, you know, that kind of level, but really understanding your remit and being an expert in your field. I suppose that's one of the most important things to take forward, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, I mean, both Sandra and Kevin, I mean, I'd probably just take everything that they've said, you know, and sort of, you know, use that as a starting point. But it's really important to understand the job that you're in, the remit that it has, the offences that you're likely to be exposed to. Those are all your starting points. So you need to have that. You need to understand your points to prove and the type of information you can get lawfully, you know, the legal gateways you can exploit, you know, and all of that. So that's really important. The secondary side to that is what you know, both Sandra and Kevin picked up on in terms of conferences and building up that knowledge. In my experience, legal professionals find it just as difficult sometimes to interpret complex legislation as a layperson sometimes, you know. But they are the legal professionals, so they have, their job is to do that, you know. So as a counter fraud professional, you have to rely on a lot of other professionals to help you do your job. So but having a good understanding of legislation and how that legislation operates and how it applies to your job is really important. That's something you really want to grasp sooner rather than later in terms of your remit. For example, in an organisation that has responsibility for investigating something without, say, a prosecuting power, so they might build up the evidence to pass on to the police, for example, will have a different remit to an organisation that does have a prosecuting power, because they have to, as Kevin said, start from a criminal standard at the very start. But the organisation that doesn't, they still need to have that knowledge of that criminal standard, so they don't compromise anything that they do maybe pass on to the police or the serious fraud office, etc. You know, so it's really, really important to understand your remit, your scope of your job, and the legislation that sort of falls behind it. There's a lot of overlapping legislation. Ask your managers, ask your mentors, etc. All of that really, really important. But it's, you can only become a really good counter fraud professional by having a good grounding, and that's really important, I would say.
Yeah, and that point about asking questions as well. I think it's very easy to kind of just get caught up in a role. You know, you're desperate to learn and know things, but the counter fraud profession is very unique in that, as we've sort of alluded to a few times now. Everyone is really engaged, so ask questions, and it ties all the way back to having a good network, doesn't it? You know, reach out on LinkedIn, attend those conferences. I think we mentioned conferences quite a lot, and a really good example is the Charity Fraud Awareness Week that Fraud Advisory Panel has been running. That's obviously for the charity sector, but there's a report that came out, yes, that focused on the charity sector, but the general trends highlighted inside a threat, the general fraud threats can be applied sort of across industry as well. Obviously, Sandra, you supported with Charity Fraud Awareness Week. Is it fair to say that that's a really good example of how different sectors can use one topic to kind of really work together and collaborate to tackle fraud, from your experience in Charity Fraud Awareness Week last year?
Definitely yes, because again, as mentioned, fraud is part of a bigger picture, right, which is financial crime, and so you don't tackle corruption as you tackle fraud, or as you tackle, anti-money laundering, or money laundering rather. So it's important that those initiatives, such as the fraud advisory panel, exists so that you can, especially again going back to knowing your remit, you need your scope, you need to identify the right organization, such as a fraud advisory panel will allow you to get more information in the field that you're operating in. So definitely that was absolutely useful for that.
You said it, in your remit, the network. I think it's trying to stay as focused and be as clear as possible and not get overwhelmed with trying to learn so many different things when you first step into this career. If you sort of draw all of that together, what would you say, Kevin, if I can ask you this question, what would be the kind of one piece of advice you would give to someone that, watching this today, or watching it further down the line, people who are just starting or looking to change their career or develop? What's the one piece of advice that you would give to someone looking to join the counter fraud profession?
Yep. And I think it's a theme that's run through this session, and that is that you are never alone. Sadly, we will never know enough. The fraudsters, they're always constantly changing and refreshing their game, so we're having to keep pace with that. And to enable us to keep pace, that's why we do need to can't just rely on our own knowledge and skill sets. We do need to be able to reach out to others, be within our organisation, as Michael mentioned, in terms of legal and HR support and other teams, the police, mentioned earlier the counter fraud investigator apprenticeship that gives people new into the profession the good sound basis and understanding of some of the procedural requirements and legislative requirements. It's only when they start applying that, where they start building up their own experience of cases, and as I say, attend conferences and understanding shared experiences from others, that they are able to start building their own picture of what fraud looks like in their own particular sector area. And it's only by doing that, that's where we move into the fraud prevention. We can start focusing some of our resources where to look for. And the bit about we're never alone, the fraudster, they're not restricted by boundaries, and quite often a fraud, yes, we may pick it up in local government, but it could also be hitting, say, the NHS and the charity sector all at the same time, but the same fraud group. So that's why we need to be able to have these open network links so we can securely, reliably and efficiently share information. We need to have good understanding of the requirements around sharing. The General Data Protection Act, when it came in, it wasn't to restrict sharing, it was to make sure that sharing is done in the rightful legal manner. So it was actually an enabling piece of legislation that will help us to share what needs to be shared across the different sectors. And sadly, the forces where I come from, in local government, and especially in the charity sectors, the fraudsters, yes, there are victims. Those victims are usually the most vulnerable because they're taking the resources away that would otherwise provide services to these people. And again, that's why it has to be a good joined up effort. So yes, remember, you're never alone in terms of developing your own knowledge and experience.
Thanks, Ken. I think it's a really important point that you said. You mentioned it a few times, but can't possibly mention it enough, because even I'm finding with different groups and different people to speak to all the time. So yeah, that being part of that big network is a really important point to land, and to sort of round up some of the main themes, I think. Obviously, correct me if you want to sort of speak about something different, but I think if you look at that with one piece of advice, Zoe, would it be fair to say that yours would potentially be focus on, carrying on from what Kevin said, the network is really important that you have?
Yeah, definitely. Networking will always be important, no matter how many years you've been in the industry. You always need to make new connections, because your investigation scope can change. So, and new people come in the industry all the time. People have different expertise. People come from different lines of, like, different sectors. Some person might have come from the police industry, now working in the fraud industry. Some people might have come from the council, coming into charities. So they all have different bits of knowledge that you can take from each other. So it is very important. Basically, you can't do this on your own. You need to ask questions. And one thing I would tell myself is not to be afraid of asking stupid questions. No question is stupid, as long as you're getting some sort of knowledge from it. Just go ahead, basically.
You have to it's important to be proactive, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. You have to be proactive. Yeah, you have to put yourself out there.
Yeah, exactly. And as you said, people are receptive, so don't be afraid
Absolutely.
to connect on LinkedIn, to join conferences, to join events, being really proactive with that network.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Sandra, if I can ask you about that kind of one sort of takeaway we've got to the network and not being alone. Do you think, would you say resources, and by resources, conferences, do the right reading, those kind of areas?
Yeah, I would say that, and again, like going back to as well, following those subject matter experts. Like when I say subject matter experts, those writer. Personally, I've read a few books as part of what I needed to do for my work, and I was really impressed by the depth of knowledge that was provided through this book. And I started to follow those people on LinkedIn, and even ask questions sometimes when something seems to be not making sense to me. And I was really surprised of how those, again, subject matter experts were willing to answer those questions, and even be happy that you show curiosity and interest in this field. So I would definitely say, yeah, to what the other speaker said, don't be worried to ask questions, to connect people to people that are knowledgeable in the field, because more likely than not, they will answer to you and they will be happy that you show interest in their work. So definitely, I would also add something else. Funny, I don't know if it's funny, but the financial, the anti-fraud, the financial crime word attract a lot of attention from the entertainment also industry. And so another way I would say when you start your career to like get acquainted with it is also do not hesitate to like watch those, movie or TV show that, talk about that topic. It may not be always accurate, but at least it'll give you like a good idea of like those massive like scandal or, fraud scheme that may have happened in the past. It's also a good way to sort of get into knowing a bit better this industry as well.
Sandra. And then Michael, the point that I've really sort of taken from what you said and underpins everything that Sandra, Zoe and Kevin have said, just knowing your own remit, be focused, be an expert in your area. Is it fair to say that you'd probably give that bit of advice on top of what's already?
Yeah. I mean, I think looking into coming into the counter fraud profession, networking is extremely important. So LinkedIn, building up your profile, etc. Once you're there, it's really about that remit and understanding it. But I think probably, I don't know, the biggest piece of advice, maybe in that first year of you being a counter fraud professional in any shape or form, is probably to understand that you can't be successful if you work in a silo. Yeah. Fraudsters don't understand. I think Kevin mentioned it earlier. They don't work in boundaries. You've heard of like cross-line fraud and crime that's happening across the country, across borders. So fraudsters and criminals don't operate like that. We are sort of confined to our jobs and etc. And so we do have parameters, but there's things that we can do and methods that we can do in terms of helping us to deal with that. So part of that is to understand that, not to work in silos, because I think, something that is, say, affecting a local authority like where I'm in, could just as easily, that same fraudster will be targeting a charity or voluntary group or a private sector group or the bank. I mean, I think even Sandra alluded to, generally the fraud, it's a financial crime, effectively. Someone is trying to get money. That money needs to get into a bank account so that fraudster can spend it, whatever they want to spend it on. So it's understanding that. So it doesn't really matter. Fraudsters don't look at sectors like we do. They look at how they're going to target the weakest controls possible to get maximum profit, just like any other business would. Yeah. Least effort, maximum profit. And once you have that mindset, once you understand you don't work in silos, there is legal frameworks around data sharing, but there's a lot of things that can be done, like the network, etc. Sharing best practice, putting in good controls. Probably one piece of advice that I had, I didn't realize when I first joined counter fraud how big it was and how it overlapped what the police do. The police will have access to lots of powers, but not necessarily lots of information. And that information is normally contained in local authorities, the public sector, banks, charities, etc. But the police don't have that. So we all sort of need each other to fulfill the same objective. That's really important to understand.
No, it really is. And then using each other's expertise as well. And when you have that network and understanding that there are so many different sectors, you can work with each other and build on each other's strengths. I think that's a key point as well. We haven't had any questions, but I think I'm just checking. No, there's no questions. But I think if there's nothing sort of further to add, we covered some really important points, which I think for anyone starting the career, will be hugely useful, and also not just for people starting their career, just when you work in this space anyway. For me, highlighting don't get overwhelmed, which we all can do when we're trying to do so many different things. Realizing and recognizing rather that there are networks out there that we should all be part of. Being proactive, as Zoe has said, actually, no matter what stage of your career you're at, like you said, Mark, don't rest on your laurels. Always be proactive. Continue to drive. Continue to speak. Continue to ask questions, because you never know enough. And those times where you are working really hard, like we all do, knowing that you're not alone and that there are other people out there that can help and are always willing to support. Cross sector is, like most things, worth mentioning again. I think if we haven't got any questions, I'll just say a massive thank you to Michael, to Zoe, to Kevin, and to Sandra for giving up the time today. I think it really shows that people are so willing to just give up their time to help others, which is what makes this space such a good one to be a part of. Hope obviously for putting this all together, and thanks to everyone for attending and obviously for joining today. It's the first of the FCFC webinars. When more obviously put together, we'll advertise them on the Fraud Advisory Panel website. But again, just a massive thank you to everyone for supporting the panel and for making today happen. Thank you.